Southwest Florida.
Yeah, and that's really the big thing with that track shift towards the west and the models gradually shifting west, pretty much lining up right on I-75 for a potential landfall in Collier County with the storm tracking right up the coast. Now, a lot of folks have been asking about storm surge, and this is what we're expecting as far as the potential for storm surge with Irma as it makes landfall and pushes across the area. Venice to Captiva, right now we're looking at a 5 to 8 foot surge. From Captiva, though, down to Cape Sable, 8 to 12 feet of storm surge. So this is why this is very important. You need to really pay close attention to this as the storm surge is the biggest killer with hurricanes as they make landfall with these big tropical systems like this. And this is a big hurricane. And that's one of the reasons why we're expecting such significant storm surge. It was as a result of the size of the storm. It's a fairly large storm, and you can clearly see that now moving through the central Bahamas. It battered the Turks and Caicos and did some damage, of course, a couple of days ago over the northern Leeward Islands and the British and U.S. Virgin Islands. Now it has its sights set on the very northern coast of Cuba. We do not expect it to move inland over Cuba. It could, but we're not forecasting that because we think that north turn is going to occur before it reaches there. And then we're going to gradually see this thing make its way towards the Florida coast here. So you can see the movement is westward, and it's had kind of a ragged eye today, so it hasn't looked as impressive on satellite today as it has the past couple of days. And what's happened is it's gone through what we call an eyewall replacement cycle. Very typical for these storms. When they're this strong, they lose their old eye, develop a new one. Sometimes they weaken, the intensity will level off, and then we'll see some intensification. And it looks like the Hurricane Center is expecting that with the water temperatures that it's going over now and will go over until landfall. Very warm, very favorable, light wind shear for the time being. And then as we get closer to the coast here, we're expecting the potential for intensification into a borderline Cat 5, high-end Cat 4 hurricane as it makes its way towards the Collier County coastline. So here's a little closer inspection of what we're expecting. You can see there, 155 mile an hour sustained winds, I should say. Category 4 hurricane Saturday afternoon at 2 just north of the Cuba coast. Then pushing through the Keys as potentially a Category 5 hurricane, making landfall sometimes Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon early, and then pushing inland across the state. And if you look at that track would basically put a lot of the cities in Southwest Florida under the gun here. We're talking about Naples, all the way up through Fort Myers, Bonita Springs, Estero, including Lehigh Acres, Gateway, the Cape, also getting in some of those stronger winds if this track verifies, and moving off towards the north end of Charlotte County as well. Even Arcadia, looks like the core would go over DeSoto County and Arcadia, Northport, so grazing perhaps the west end of the southern portions of the southeastern portions of Sarasota County, I should say, and then moving up towards Tampa Bay. So it should start to weaken quickly once it moves inland, especially as it gets north of Tampa, as it's going to encounter a little bit more wind shear. But as a result, though, we're expecting the possibility of hurricane force winds from all the way from the Keys all the way to the top of the state to the Georgia border. Hurricane warning now in effect for the entire area. So the graphics updated there to show you that the entire area now is under a hurricane warning, and a storm surge warning also in effect. And you remember those values I showed you, 5 to 8 feet from Venice down to Captiva, Captiva down towards Cape Sable, including all the rest of Southwest Florida. 8 to 12 foot storm surge expected. Guys, back over to you.
Real quick, just a question from Christy Alfonso on my Facebook page. She just Facebooked me and said, if you could find out, we're in Lehigh Acres, we're very concerned about flooding. Are we flood prone? We're debating whether to evacuate.
I think in this situation, if there's any threat for flooding, we're talking about from heavy rainfall. We're expecting some big rainfall amounts. It doesn't look like the surge is going to get that far inland, of course, but we are expecting some heavy rain, and there very well could be some flooding as a result of some of the heavy rainfall totals. And we could easily see in the 15-inch range, maybe some isolated spots up to 20 with the system as it moves inland. But in general, I think most folks will get between about 5 to 15 inches of rainfall, some higher amounts as well. But the storm is different from Harvey in the sense that it'll be moving and it won't be stalling out, so it won't have time to really dump those really big rainfall totals. Guys?
All right, Derek, can I ask you a question too? I have Lori Miranda here. She lives on Marco Island, and I think this would be a good clarification for a lot of people. When it comes to storm surge, we hear, you know, whatever it may be, 8 to 10 feet. Can you explain what that means? Because she's asking, what does that mean from the land up? She's hearing a lot of people talking about it, and she's wondering, like, her elevation of her home is at 9.5 feet. Can you explain what people should kind of take into consideration here?
Well, basically, it's the height above sea level. So, you know, you're talking about a 5 to 8 foot surge. That's 5 to 8 feet on, above sea level. So that's on top of that. And then you also have to consider the wave action on top of that. So, and then not only that, we have to look and see when this thing comes in at high tide. And right now I looked at the tide information for Chokoloskee, and it looks like the low tide is going to be happening right around that time, right around 1240 is when we're expecting low tide. That would be a better situation. Now keep in mind, those values are assuming that it comes in at high tide. So if it comes in at lower tide, we are going to be looking at a lower storm surge, but that's what you're looking at when you look at those values above sea level.
All right, and also just so our viewers know, Governor Rick Scott is supposed to address you directly at any moment now. As soon as we get the word from our producers here in our earpieces, we'll let you know to go straight to him. But Derek, while we've got the time here, question for you from one Mr. Patrick Nolan. I keep seeing this storm surge warning for all of Collier County, and I wonder, like, how can that apply to Immokalee? I mean, are we talking about a storm surge that's going to go that far inland?
Well, no, I think a lot of times when these warnings plot, sometimes they break them out into zones, and I'll show it to you. It looks like you can see. Let me pull it up here. The storm surge warning you see is, and you see also for inland Lee County as well. So really, mainly this is for the coastal areas. The National Weather Service actually breaks these up into zones, and when they send these warnings out, it's actually disseminated that way so that the computer can, paint and color the areas that are under the particular warning. It looks like, though, that the threat for surge is going to be mainly, again, for the coastal areas as this storm makes its way into the area. So we're just talking about the coastal areas, Patrick, and rather than well inland like that.
Okay, and I don't feel so silly. Remember, there are no silly questions, but Scott Beloven just Facebooked me the same question at the same time I asked it, so I'm so glad you addressed that.
It may be a way that I could just remove those to just emphasize that it's just mainly the coastal areas and try to get Immokalee out of there. It is a bit misleading.
Well, I got to tell you, though, anytime you're having those color codes on the map, it's probably just good to get all of our attention because, as you've been telling us for days, Derek, any part of Southwest Florida that you live in is going to be impacted by the storm in one way or the other. And I just think that's something we got to pay close attention to. I've just watched that chart where you showed the wind danger. You know that one that's like the bar chart, and then it shows.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like hyper focused. I'm like, man, that thing got really long since last night. Look at that now.
Well,
close to high.
Well, before, and for our friends over in Glades and Hendry County and over in Collier County as well, inland portions, the threat was high for you guys anyway. But the threat really started to ramp up for high winds when it looked like the core of the storm was going to come more into Southwest Florida. So now we're looking at a larger area that's going to be dealing with very strong winds. And of course, right under the eye, right where the center tracks, that's where we were looking at that big time wind, where we could be looking at category 3, 4 winds all the way up through a good chunk of Southwest Florida.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Derek. And of course, we're going to be checking back with Derek throughout the evening here. We're staying live on the air with you all the way through 11:30 at least. We know you have plenty of questions. The system that seems to be working for us is for you to Facebook Amy and me directly. We can answer the questions about shelter. I really want the questions for Derek to be specifically about the weather itself, the system itself, how the storm might impact you. And he's constantly integrating this information from all these different models on the National Hurricane Center. And I feel like just giving you just a laser sharp focus on exactly how this storm is going to affect Southwest Florida and how it's changing truly minute by minute now when it comes to impacts in our area. And the bottom line is that it's becoming more serious for us.
And so if you aren't already, friends with us,